Shalom, and thank you for joining me. I'm going to pick up more in Matthew chapter 14. I'm going to begin in verse 13 and read through verse 21. And this is the story, this is the second fear in this particular chapter. This is the fear that we don't have enough to feed these people. I think that's an interesting fear. Now, Jesus had just heard about John the Baptist being beheaded. So after hearing this terrible and tragic news, it begins in verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." And Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "Well, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people, and they all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. There's some fascinating things in this. First of all, I want to make sure, I have some notes here. I want to make sure I read them to you. So, first of all, Jesus withdrew to this deserted place so he could mourn the loss of his cousin, John the Baptist, who had been beheaded. Mourning our losses, by the way, is important. Jesus took the time to do that. So can you. You don't have to be strong for everybody. Jesus did not turn away the crowds, by the way, when they intruded on him. Instead, he had compassion. He always had compassion on them. It's a very interesting thing. Now, he also challenged his disciples to feed these 5,000 men plus their wives and children, which means this crowd, if each man was married and each man had 1 child, that could be up to 15,000 people. If even half of them were married and each of them had 1 child, that could be 10,000 people. So this is a lot of people. And it's a surefire bet that Jesus and 12 disciples do not have enough food to feed 10 to 15,000 people. But I like what Jesus said. You give them something to eat. I think that's fascinating. No matter what you think you're capable of, no matter what you know you have and what your limits are, when you hand it over to Jesus, it is more than enough for him to accomplish his work and his will through you. Yield to him and watch what he does in you and through you. Now, it's also interesting that the 5 loaves and the 2 fish can accomplish a whole lot once Jesus blesses it. And your talents, your abilities are more than enough for you to do what God has asked you to do. Why? Because he will bless it. And that's why. What's God calling you to do? What are you saying no to? What are you reluctant to? Maybe you should change your mind. Maybe you should just say yes and watch what God does. Now, at the end of it all, they collected 12 baskets of leftovers. That is not an unusual number. In fact, in the Bible, the number 12 is extremely insignificant. There are 12 patriarchs. There are 12 tribes of Jesus. There are 12 apostles. So here we are, the number 12. There were the 12 tribes of Israel too, by the way. 12 is a very significant number. It is not a random number that 12 baskets were collected. Now, you also find out something else. God gave the Israelites manna in the desert. That's in Exodus chapter 16. The prophet Elisha in 2 Kings 4, fed 100 men in this miraculous way. He had a small amount, and he hid these men, and he fed them and took care of them, and he did not have enough to feed them, but when he yielded it to God, food was multiplied, and the 100 ate. So foreshadowing what Jesus does. Jesus, like God in the wilderness with Israel, like the prophet Elisha feeding the 100 prophets, Jesus fed the 5,000 men plus their wives and children in the wilderness with bread that was not enough, but because it was blessed, it was more than enough. Think about your life and what you can do for Christ if you just say yes and let him bless it. Thanks for joining me.